This is the large day pack, style number 9791. This was made in Costa Rica in 2002. It came to me pretty flat, dry, and with a couple hidden secrets that I did not know. There were some issues in the piping in the corner here, just a little bit of wear, and as you can see, the edges were extremely dry and just in some desperate need for a lot of love. I got this bag to compare with my small day pack that I already have, and I could only find it in the nickel hardware, and usually I'm not a big nickel or silver girly, but I decided to get it anyway, and it turned out to be a really important project because look at this ink stain on the inside that I discovered while I was inspecting the bag. I had no idea that this was in here, and it is quite a big blotch of ink, so I turned the bag inside out to examine it further, and it didn't look too bad. It hadn't gone through the leather, so I didn't see it on the other side, but it looked pretty fresh and still really pigmented, and so I was worried about color transfer, so I decided to tackle it. I first started with a vacuum very thoroughly all over, and I found some goodies in the pocket and made sure to get all the little crevices and cracks and just all the dust and debris from years of use. Then I used my suede brush to brush and clean the suede parts, and as you can see here, a lot of little black bits came off the bag, and so I threw on some gloves and just continued to brush through the suede. It's always important to clean as you go so you don't have any of that dust and dirt getting back into the leather. Then I went in with my Angelus suede cleaner in my foam pump here and distributed it evenly throughout the bottom of the bag to start, and used my round horsehair brush to scrub it in and get that cleaner in there. And as you can see, it did clean up pretty easily at the start. There were just, random little splotches of whatever. I don't know what it could be. So I just worked on those first to try to get the bag in as clean of condition as possible before tackling the more major ink stains. I use a toothbrush on the more stubborn bits and use a paper towel to blot out any of the areas that I thought might have ink in it. And this corner here had a little bit of black dye or ink coming off, so I used cuticle remover, which is a trick that I'm trying here for the first time, to get that off and to lift the color. And I wasn't sure if this was the dye from the actual black leather or if it was ink, so I blotted it until I was satisfied and continued on to the blue ink area with the cuticle remover. I just put a dab all over and let it sit as I worked on that corner. As you can see here, the color coming off is definitely decreasing as I go, and I just pump on that suede cleaner on there to try to lift up the rest of that dye. Then on the blue ink spot, I went in with my Q-tip and really gently tried to lift up that color to kind of inspect what's going on. This is my first big ink project, so I didn't really know exactly what to do, and I didn't know if scrubbing it harder would be better or if being gentle was the way to go. So I just started off by being gentle, and as you can see here, the ink is lifting off really, really easily. And I'm not sure if that's the cuticle remover or if it's just because there's so much ink in here, but you'll see how long this process actually takes me. Even fast forwarded and edited, it is quite a task. So I continue on trying to remove and lift the ink as best as I could, going in with the cuticle remover a little bit at a time. And I wanted to use the Q-tip method for as long as I could. And I eventually did give up and move to using paper towel instead, because I figured I would be able to lift off more ink in a bigger surface area as I continued on. And then I used the suede cleaner as well to see if it would help lift up that ink, and I massaged it in really gently, and as you can see, the ink is coming off really, really easily from the leather, and I just go in with my paper towel to try to lift it all up, and that is the method I kind of used going forward to try to lift up as much as I could. Not everyone does this. Not everyone tries to remove ink because ink is quite a pain to remove. As you can see here, the pile on the left is going to just continue to grow and grow. But I decided I wanted to take the time and effort to taking this ink stain out because I don't want to risk any more of it getting to other parts of the bag in case the bag gets wet and the ink blooms or anything like that. And I do want to rehome this bag to someone who enjoys nickel hardware more than me. So I wanted to do my absolute best to get this ink spot lifted as much as I could. Then I eventually thought I should dunk the bag, but I didn't want to dunk the entire thing because I had a fear that the ink would get everywhere. So I just dunked the corner that the ink spot was in, and I used that method to get kind of the last little bits of the ink out. And again, I'm just kind of trying to gently squeeze the ink out and blot as I go. I tried really hard to not rub it in. I really did my best to try to blot rather than rub. And I do think it worked really well because as you can see in the paper towel here, as I continue going forward, less and less ink started coming off that spot. Then I continued to clean the inside of the bag as normal using the Suede cleaner in the foam pump and used my horsehair brush to scrub the edges and the corners really, really well to ensure that the inside was nice and clean. And I noticed some more ink coming out, so I decided to go back in until it stopped bleeding again. And then I used my Lexol 1 and distilled water mixture to clean the inside leather portion of the bag. You can see here how dry the bag really is. It just soaked up that Lexol 1 immediately. So I went in with my leather CPR and gave it a really nice massage to get it nice and conditioned on the inside. The inside is just as important as the outside to take care of. I think it's so neglected often because we don't see it, but it's really important to take care of the inside as well. Then I flipped the bag right side out and gave it a bit of a stuffing to maintain the shape on the bottom. And I just used craft paper here to again lightly stuff the bag and make it easier to work with. And then I got to work on the top flap of the bag with my Suede brush and cleaner. And then I continued to clean the outside as normal. I didn't take any of the hardware off for this bag because the nickel hardware was in really, really good condition and didn't need any work, any polishing or anything like that. When I'm restoring, I don't like to overdo things that I don't think needs to be done, so I left that alone. And I just made sure to clean every single aspect of the bag and the straps as well before continuing on to address the worn out edges and the piping. And of course, I can't forget the leather CPR conditioning. This bag, like I said, was quite dry, so I wanted to ensure that it was nice and conditioned before I started working on the edges further. Look at the difference that makes. That's just the first round of leather CPR and a little bit of brushing with the horsehair brush. This part is so important because we really don't want any of that leather CPR pooling in any of the crevices or edges or anything like that. And we want to make sure that all the product is evenly distributed. So the horsehair brush step is quite important, but if you don't have one, no worries. You can always just use a microfiber cloth or just a little paper towel and just be gentle about it and get the excess off so we don't have any pooling on the edges. Or you can just use your fingers to try to make sure that it is nice and massaged into all the areas of the bag and that there is no excess left behind. This bag did take a couple rounds of conditioning probably overall, but I'm just showing you the first round here. And I always like to use my thread zapper as well to get any loose ends or any of those fraying bits on any part of the bag, especially if there's any loose threads. I like to melt those down to prevent them from loosening any further. Now to get to the piping, where I use paintable filler here. It's by Angelus, and it's kind of like this white cement kind of, and I like to use really thin coats of this product, and I just use a old makeup brush with this. I have a couple makeup brushes that I don't use anymore, so I clean them up and I use them for this purpose now. And you can see here that I go over this area quite a lot, and I even wipe it off as I go because I want to just get really thin layers to try to have the hole basically in the piping filled in as naturally and smoothly as possible to the rest of the piping. So you can see here it's a lot of very tedious work, and I took it off a lot and redid it because I found that this product does have a tendency to be thick and stay really thick. And if it is put on really thick, I worried that it wouldn't dry as nicely. So I wanted to just do really thin layers and have it kind of drying as I go. And you can see here that I really struggled getting the right shape of the filler because I want to get the part that is indented and has like that divot in the piping, and I didn't want to go over it too much. So I just went over it again and again, wiped it off and tried again, wiped it off and tried again. And then after it was fully dry, I used a horsehair brush to kind of buff it a little bit before going in with this very fine sandpaper. In the past, I used a little sanding block, but my dad actually bought this very fine grit sandpaper for me, and I did find that it works much better. And you have to be really careful when sanding the filler here because you don't want to sand the leather around it too much. I did make that mistake before, and you want to make sure you're conditioning as you go as well because that leather on the side is going to get dry and agitated with all the sanding going on around it, because obviously it's impossible to not get any of the leather at all when you're trying to sand the filler to try to fix it. So I use the conditioner here around it, trying not to get the actual filler wet too much. And then I went in with the filler again because I caused some of the filler to come off in the sanding. So I want to fill those holes back up. And as you can see, this is quite a tedious process. I had to wait for this to dry. So this was over multiple days of waiting and painting and drying and sanding and waiting and doing it all over again multiple times. But I do think the finished product is totally worth it. And it was a small piping job. So if the piping is totally busted, some people like to take other piping and sew it on, but I haven't had any bags with that kind of serious piping issues yet. So this is the method that I personally just like to use. And as you can tell, this is the next day or maybe even a couple days later, I can't remember, but I went in and really carefully sanded those edges back again. And I just use my finger here to determine the smoothness of the filler versus the piping around it, because you want to try to get it as flat as possible to the surrounding area to try your best to mask the hole that is being filled, because if you do it too much, then you get a bump and you'll be really obvious that there is something put in there. So it's like a very fun balancing act between filling the hole and also having it even with the rest of the bag. Then once I figured it is smooth enough, I used my Angelus black paint with a different makeup brush, and I just took the paint that was on the lid here to do very light coats of paint. And this was also a bit of trial and error as well. I did some paint and I realized that the filler was a little too bumpy for my liking, so I wiped the paint off to do a little bit more sanding. And as you can see, I'm just using my finger here to determine the smoothness and going over it again and again just to get that nice, smooth, even surface. Really nice thin layers of paint is great here. I'm actually wanting to get a different product that makes the paint less shiny and it makes it a bit more matte, and apparently that makes it blend into the leather better. But I find doing really thin coats with a really light hand and blending it throughout the other edges of the piping around the filler really helps blend in that paint and the filler. So you can see I'm painting around the piping on the outside as well to try to blend that paint nice and evenly. So here's a reminder of what the piping looked like before and after. I think that I did a pretty good job. It's definitely not perfect, but the whole bag before looked really dry and sad and flat. And now the bag is ready for new adventures and eventually a new home. And it was a labor of love for sure with the ink blot and with the piping issues and all that kind of stuff. I learned a lot by doing this. I'm just so happy with how it turned out. I think it looks absolutely beautiful.